we're going to go ahead and start just a little bit early on the next section. I know it's only 10:58, but that's okay. We actually have two speakers in this next section that have canceled. So we're going to have a bit of time from 11:15 to 11:30. And so I would say if there's questions, if there's maybe something that you didn't address a previous speaker and you want to come back and maybe talk about that, that would be an opportunity. But let's go ahead and hear from Darcy Telenko. And this is a Northeastern New York Farm Viability Initiative, I believe is what that is. Darcy, you can correct me if I'm wrong. The title is Evaluation of Novel Bird Repellents in Vegetable Crops, and Darcy is with the Cornell Cooperative Extension Program in Vegetables. So Darcy, go ahead.
Thank you, Steve. I think you can hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay. I want to say that Rebecca kind of introduced a little bit of what we're going to talk about again here, looking at novel bird repellents and sweet corn. Some background on this project. We started with the NESARE Partnership Grant for 1 year, and then we've had 2 years of funding with the New York Farm Viability Institute. So we're just finishing up year 3. We kind of expanded a little bit on our the tools we looked at to explore, and then we're working on trying to summarize the data for our winter meetings. So wildlife has continued to be a persistent problem in a lot of our fresh market vegetable crops. With in particular birds and sweet corn. In the fresh market side, there's 0 tolerance for any damage. So even if one kernel of corn gets pecked, that becomes unmarketable. So this has become a really big problem, particularly in years where we may have drought conditions where we see more wildlife move into the sweet corn. But generally, a lot of our growers see about 16% yield loss annually from birds moving into sweet corn. So this is kind of a little bit of the background. We had a grower report he lost 5,000 dozen ears of corn overnight when these big flocks of particularly red-winged blackbirds move into the sweet corn and find this relatively sweet feeding site. So you can move on to the next slide, and I'll talk about some of the tools we were looking at. In general, we looked at 4 different tools and compared them to an untreated. One was looking at a chemical control, avian control, which is a methyl anthranilate. This compound's been around for years, used a lot in fruits, and had some positive and negative management controls. So we really wanted to see what the problem was, and it generally seems to be a timing factor. The idea with using methyl anthranilate is we need to get it out there. It causes a bad reaction in the birds, so they kind of get a stomach ache and learn not to go to that feeding site. But if they learn ahead of time that there's a sweet corn there that they want to feed on, it's kind of hard to control the birds. So we looked at making 2 applications of the avian control, 2 weeks and then 1 week prior to crop maturity. And then we wanted to also look at that, whether if 3 weeks was a better control option or just applying it one time before picking. In addition to that, we looked at an air dancer. This is one of those little guys that dances you see at a car dealerships. And we wanted to see if that would provide enough scare, particularly in areas where we have smaller sweet corn acreage. Some of the limitations on that are finding the electric source. We started with using gas generators, and the problem with that is the growers would have to fill them up daily to maintain the gas. We've looked at solar options, but right now finding enough battery that'll keep the charge for that to dance all day long is a economical limitation. So right now where we're seeing the air dancers where we can plug it into electric, we generally set it up to turn on and off every 5 to 10 minutes, and it runs from sun up to sundown. Our third treatment, we were looking at the scare eye balloons or hawkeye balloons, and we'd set them up on a corner in 3 different spots to see if they blow around and scare the birds to keep away. And then we added the last 2 years a detassel treatment. So once the sweet corn had reached 50% brown silks, we would go in and trim the tassels off the top, eliminating that perch site. The one limitation on this is if the growers are using mechanical harvesters, there's nowhere to pull the sweet corn in to harvest it from. But it shows for hand picking, it actually eases the picking because you can eliminate that tassel from the area. So we looked at all 4 of these treatments. And you can move on to the next slide. So the one thing we do find a lot of these, looking at managing wildlife, is success is highly dependent on timing, placement, and crop maturity. It's a matter of getting the treatments out there in time where the birds don't find the crop to feed on. So we really need to implement the tactics before the birds learn about the food source. We found that the avian, again, applied 2 weeks prior to picking, which is about 50% brown silk. It worked really well, and in addition to the second application about 1 week later. Our air dancer, again, we did see that had relatively little disease damage to those areas, but it's only a small area. If you had a 2-acre field, you'd probably need 5 or 6 air dancers across that field. So that's a big limitation, but in our small scale farms, it would work as an effective way to scare the birds away. Again, detasseling looks really effective. We've seen the reduced damage in that. Again, it depends on how you're harvesting the sweet corn, whether it's useful. And then the scare eye balloons, we recommend you maybe using in combination with our tactics. That's the one treatment we see the most damage. I think the birds get accustomed to the balloons and then determine that they won't harm them, and they can go in there and feed. Many of our growers are excited about these tactics. Some are utilizing the chemical treatment in their early sweet corn where they see the most damage, and they're seeing really good results. But again, they need to identify those fields that have the most risk to have these tactics work effectively.
Well, thanks, Darcy. That's really good. I think this is what have you done this 3 times now?
Yeah, this is my 3rd talk, yeah.
Yeah.
Third time, and I think this will be the last one on wildlife and birds, at least.
No, I think it's really good to see, we've heard about what you're doing, and it's really been nice to see that progression and see how your research is developing, because that's one of the things that we're trying to, establish here. So I really appreciate that, because to see something from the beginning and now you're seeing treatments that are actually, being used or potentially adopted by the growers. I think that's really great. So thank you. And
thank you.
I would encourage others, keep talking, keep coming back to this and giving us updates. It's really good. So we're going to move along to our next speaker, and this is so we had a speaker cancel 11:05, so 11:10. We're going to hear about the bringing IPM to the Hispanic workforce in the Mid-Atlantic mushroom industry, and this is Maria Gorgo, and she's with the Penn State IPM program. And Maria, why don't you go ahead and give us talk about what you've got here going on with the mushrooms?
Sure, thank you. Good morning. My name is Maria Gorgo, and I'm currently working for Penn State Extension as the Food Safety, IPM, and Water Quality Extension Educator for the horticulture team. In my previous job at Penn State Extension, I worked for the Pennsylvania IPM program as the Latino Community Outreach Coordinator. Bringing IPM to the Hispanic workforce in the Mid-Atlantic mushroom industry was a grant proposal awarded by the Northeast Regional IPM Center back in 2014 to Dr. Ed Rajat. Dr. Rajat is a Penn State professor and also the Pennsylvania IPM coordinator, and also to Katie Popiti and myself. Next slide, please. Traditionally, the majority of extension mushroom programming, trainings, and educational materials available on IPM topics have been produced and directed towards an English-speaking audience. However, demographics are changing. The number of Hispanic managed or owned mushroom companies is increasing, and currently more than 90% of the mushroom industry employees are Hispanic. With the Hispanic population growing in size and strength, Hispanics will impact the future of our society and will play an important role in the future of agriculture in the US. Currently, there are many Latinos working in the ag field. Latinos' role will increase in importance, in leadership, and in numbers. First, I want to share with you some important demographic statistics at the national and state levels. According to the 2010 National Census, Hispanics of all races are the largest minority in the country, representing 16% of the total US population. That's about 50.5 million people. Between 2000 and 2010, the Hispanic population grew by 43%, accounting for 55.5% of the nation's growth since 2000. The Census Bureau projects that by the year 2050, the Hispanic share of the nation's total population will almost double, from 16% to 30%. In the Northeast region, the growth rate was 82.6% for Pennsylvania, 96.4% for Delaware, and 106.5% for Maryland. The outstanding 82.6% of growth of Hispanics in Pennsylvania from 2000 to 2010 is one of the largest increases in any state's Hispanic population. In addition, according to a 2014 report of the U.S. Department of Agriculture Ag Census, the average age of farmers in the U.S. has increased to 58 years old. The number of new farmers has decreased by 20%, while the number of Hispanic-operated farms has increased 21%. In Pennsylvania, this growth rate was even bigger. It was 24%. Next slide, please. During the first phase of the grant, we identified partner needs and priorities for a bilingual IPM materials and programming. We also established an advisory group, and culturally preferred learning styles and needs of Hispanic farmers and employees were learned. The goal was to survey farm owners and farm workers of the industry to assess the current knowledge and the needs of for IPM information and training in English and especially in Spanish. We gathered a total of 69 responses from 40 farms across the US, and the preliminary survey results were analyzed and shared with the advisory group to discuss results and future training goals. Based on the information we collected by the surveys, we continue to complete the rest of the objectives. In summary, we translated 10 IPM articles, fact sheets, and we reviewed the Pennsylvania Mushroom Manual. Twice a year for 3 years, we conducted two pesticide meetings in Spanish, so participants can obtain core and category credits to maintain a pesticide applicator license. In this case, we were able to train over 200 people. In collaboration with the Pesticide Education Program at Penn State Extension, we conducted a free pesticide applicator license study course in Spanish. We offered on-farm trainings in Spanish with topics requests made on an individual farm basis. And we trained over 150 employees in this case. In addition, we also produced 4 bilingual posters for the major mushroom pests. We printed 100 copies that were distributed to mushroom farms across Pennsylvania and also to other states. So in conclusion, as the demographic changes in agriculture, we need to identify strategies and practices to work with Latinos so we can implement culturally appropriate and effective programs for this audience. This way, Extension can effectively achieve its goal, which is to treat and teach everyone in the farm community. That's it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. And that information that's available online. Is that right?
It is.
Okay.
Yes.
So yes, very important, and I appreciate your talk. So we've got about a little less than 20 minutes before we start our final section at 11:30. And so there's one person has asked, Jody Fetzer has asked, and this is, I'm sorry, that's not the question that I saw in there, but there was a question about the use of the bird, Rebecca. So the question was, do you see the use of the lasers in small gardens? Could that be used for those smaller situations too, or is there kind of a large scale, small scale? Is there any difference in that?
So what we're finding is that there's no reason they wouldn't work at small scale. The current limitation is just the commercially available units are designed for very, very large scale, but that's why we're looking for a partner to commercialize the units that we've developed for research. These lasers are similar to laser pointers or the lasers used in dance clubs. So and the beam is constantly moving. So there's essentially no risk of eye injury from them.
Okay, great. We also have another question asking, Cesar, I don't know if you're on, but they would like to know, can you define low, medium, and high in the SWD treatment locations for the spheres?
So it's location within the canopy. High is at the top of the canopy, medium is in the middle part of the canopy, and the bottom, you know, the low one is at the bottom part of the canopy. One of the things that with the spotted wing Drosophila is that it likes to hide in shaded areas. So it likes to stay like in areas that are humid and shaded. So they stay on the lower parts of the canopy. So one of the things, the problem with that is that we want the sphere to be visible to the flies. So so there's a compromise there where, you know, you either put them in the lower part where they are foraging, or you put them on the top part where they are more visible. So that's one thing that we're testing now, whether we get more efficacy if we put them in the top part of the canopy. We're actually finding that it's better if we make them more visible. So having them on the top part seems to work better than putting them in the bottom.
Yeah, my personal experience that I've been exposed to, and I'm obviously not an entomologist, but that seems to be something that's studied in orchard systems, like where the traps are placed, you know, like you were saying, low, medium, and high. Because these insects have different flight patterns, they have different tendencies, you know, like you said, shade versus non-shade. And that's something that I think, you know, sometimes we don't always take into account. And so that's, I think, a really important aspect.
And that's something also critical when you are controlling the pest, when you're using chemical control, because you want the chemicals to penetrate well into the whole canopy, because they're foraging mainly on the lower parts. So you want to have open canopies, you know, where you have better penetration of the insecticide.
Right.
So that's also critical on how good of a control you're going to have.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we've had some other chat questions. Keep using that if you'd like to. We've also got a Q&A. There's a comment about trap placement. Also need to think about placing traps where it won't hit workers or interfere with equipment. So another important thing as well, especially when we are talking about, you know, the different tools that we have available for IPM, it often causes us to think more logistically and, you know, think in ways that maybe we are not used to in a lot of situations, which, and I wanted to, I don't know if Anne is on, but one of the things that was interesting to me about her talk was border sprays. And I was just looking, I don't know, Anne, if you're on or not, but that picture that you showed where you've got the border versus the inner row. And I recently have been kind of exposed to the push-pull system. And is there any resemblance to that, you know, with how you're laying out or any of your treatments? Is that part of any of this, or is that completely separate? And I don't know if Anne, are you, maybe she isn't around.
Actually, I think Anne is offline at the moment. So
okay.
There was a question from Chang Lu for Darcy.
Okay.
And maybe you want to read it. But it said, is methyl anthranilite commonly used by farmers for repelling birds, and can organic gardeners use it?
So our farmers aren't using methylenthranolate yet. There are some that are, taking the information we've learned and trying to implement it. So we've had some good success on a couple of the farms, particularly those that we're testing the trial, some of our trials. As for organic, it is not organic certified. So that's why we kind of incorporated the air dancer and the air balloons, because that chemistry is not for organic use.
Yeah, and the thing that I guess the birds, and it's interesting, there's two of you that are working on birds. The idea of this interface between, and Rebecca really was talking about with the cannons, and that's really disruptive, and trying to develop these more maybe passive ways of dealing with birds that are kind of, a problem, and we don't often think about it, but the interface there between urban systems, the public, and how do you address a problem that is obviously been challenged with the traditional ways. And I think what you two are doing is really important to kind of move that forward in a way that's not as kind of disruptive. So it's really exciting to see that work being done.
And there's also another question for Rebecca from Jennifer Ashley. She said, I'm curious about laser units for bird scare, that she has a big starling problem in their poultry flocks and they eat a lot of the feed. Would it also scare the poultry?
Yeah, we really don't know. Lasers haven't been tested against chickens. We know they scare geese. We know that in captive trials that ducks learned to ignore them. But the other thing is, depending on how the enclosure the chickens are in is set up, it may be possible to use the laser basically above chicken eye level to scare the starlings. With the corn, what we were basically doing was making almost a lid out of light over the cornfield. And that would keep the starlings out, and you could conceivably do the same thing over a chicken pen.
Great. I wanted to go back to I don't know if Cheng Lu and Kathy Marie are on, but there was some discussion on the chat session about their projects, and I think Cheng Lu, was asking about nurses and how receptive they were to training. Perhaps I'm not maybe getting that quite right, but I think there's perhaps a connection there with with Cheng Lu, your work in apartments and working with tenants, I think is really kind of pushing beyond just, okay, looking at this treatment, how does it work in IPM, but really finding out, what people are doing. And then, Kathy, the thing that I see with yours is where you're engaging nurses, promoting school IPM, but yet there's an audience that they're working with that perhaps comes from some of these, places where cockroaches, things like that are a problem. And so I think perhaps there's maybe a connection there, maybe not. I don't know if either one of you are on or listening but maybe you want to speak to that.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. We actually, when I visited the housing, there are a lot of questions from nurses, home care nurses. They said that, they don't want to go to certain apartments because they are afraid of getting bed bugs. Some afraid of seeing the cockroaches. Of course, there are also nurses that are serving each community. They would come usually once a week to help measure blood pressure, those kind of things. I personally saw one nurse has bed bugs on her body
Wow.
because the patient has bed bugs.
Mm-hmm.
So that's actually direct observation of spreading bed bugs from one person to another person. So I told her that really it's very important that pay attention to bed bugs when they serve the residents. So certainly there is a need that to educate the nurses, home care providers for low-income communities.
Mm-hmm.
How that can be incorporated with other IPM programs, yeah, there's a need. We
Yeah.
have to identify how to connect between these groups. But I know there is a strong need. I also know that there is a school like association in New Jersey. One person actually contacted me several times about their nurses. Quite often that they encounter this kind of problems, and they don't know how to deal with it because you know, that's not their job responsibility, but they wanted to avoid that. So how to reduce the instance of spread, how to address that issue, it's a problem.
Yeah. So Changlu, are you working with social scientists in your work? You know, because you're obviously addressing this behavior, you know, how do people feel or think? I mean, do you work with social scientists as well?
Here there is a human ecology department. When I designed the questionnaire, actually I asked them to help, you know, design the questions. Basically, they are very helpful that to make sure you don't make some common mistakes, because questionnaire can actually, it have to be very simple, but also has to be very informative.
Mm-hmm.
So far, that's the only collaboration. But in the future, I may want to maybe invite them also into the project so that they can also help maybe analyze the data.
Right.
They actually do a lot of social study about people's behavioral responses to, for instance, if we educated the residents, what's the result, you know? Because right now we do all kinds of surveys because we want to know the background information, the association. But so far we haven't addressed the problem, the question of how effective is the education. So maybe that's in the future we can do that.
Yeah, I see we have a question from Maria to Charles. So yeah, she's asking, is there, oh, sorry, from Charles. So is there IPM literature for other ethnic groups such as Somali immigrants? So Maria, are you on?
Yes, I'm on. I assume there is. I don't work with this Somali immigrant, so I don't know if there's something available. And it's not in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, I think that would be more at the maybe other groups are working. Is Jennifer, are you addressing that group per se? Jennifer Hashley, are you still on?
Yes, sorry, I was just muted. I had to get back to my my button to unmute myself. Sorry, can you ask that question again about which group?
So is there IPM literature for ethnic groups such as Somali immigrants?
I don't know how much literature there is because a lot of those groups are pre-literate. So there has been a project in a national project that Hugh Joseph out of ISED Solutions has been working on. It's a BFRDP project in the last 3 years or so, and we are hosting the Ag Resource Library, which should be up in the next couple of weeks of the last 3 years of them conducting a literature search of all the basically training and technical assistance materials, picture-based information that these groups across the country have been using to teach folks all levels of production, not necessarily IPM specific, but I know there's some of that in there. So I could connect you with Hugh and his staff if you want it now before it's posted, and then it will be searchable on our website, like I said, the next month or so by November.
Yeah, can you put that in the chat box if there's a name or a link, or send it to myself or Nancy?
Sure, absolutely.
Whatever was easiest. Great, thank you. So we've got 3 minutes before we are supposed to start the next section. Anyone have any questions that they're just burning to ask? Okay. One of the things that I'm seeing is this behavior aspect. And wouldn't it be great if we could, ask the insects or ask the pests what they think? Because I think that's a lot of what we're getting at with this behavior. we're looking at what they're doing, we're looking at how they're moving, we're looking at how they're responding to these different treatments, these different production practices, and then we, you know, address how do we kind of manage them in a sustainable way. And I've thought probably, you know, not realistically, but wow, wouldn't it be good if we could find out from them exactly what they're thinking? But that's probably not in my lifetime anyway. So we've got a couple minutes, and I'm actually going to start this a little bit early, just because in case we do run over, I want to have a little bit of time at the end.